I'm Ian Wharton, and my buddy over across the sea is Oscar Hazell, back for a second time. Thank you for joining us, whether live or recorded. We're over at Findepth.com. You can check out our horizontal draft board, which is what we're going to talk about today. The second part, we did the offensive side of the ball last time. Went really in depth since we think it's going to be an offensive draft for the Dolphins. But today we're going to talk about the defensive side of the ball on that horizontal draft board. Just remember that we've kind of taken off guys that we don't think are scheme fits necessarily. So you're going to see some guys that you hear a lot about in the media that aren't really in our mix. And we kind of talked about how deep this draft is on Twitter after last session, and I think people are definitely right. It's a deep draft, but like I said, we've taken guys off of this list. So I did just want to comment on that. So it's a super deep draft if you're looking at the horizontal draft board and think it's a deep draft. But Oscar, we're going to jump into that D-line. We talked about last time how Earl Mitchell and Randy Starks, kind of their situations, the contracts they got. They're exciting signings. We think that they can both be upgrades to what we had, give them a little bit more versatility. But what would you do for the defensive line? I know the last time you talked about Starks is kind of on a one-year deal. In reality, how do you view that defensive line?
Well, I think you've got three starting caliber players in Aldrich, Starks, and Mitchell. Then you've got AJ Francis, who comes from good pedigree from a Georgia school, and he's got good promise. But I think you can never have enough interior defensive line. If you look at kind of Soliai was playing, I know he was injured for a bit, but he's played 40% of snaps last game, and he's ended up having a huge deal. So there's value in having depth in that position. You also want, I guess, versatile guys. So if you get caught in hurry up, you don't want to have kind of a road grading nose tackle that you're stuck with, and then in passing situations. So I think we've kind of put people that aren't just big lobs. If they're big, they're still disruptive, so they have value in passing down. So I think that's kind of, with Earl Mitchell, they've got someone he's not the prototype size of a nose tackle, but he has that thick lower base and is disruptive in the passing game still with quite violent hands. So they're perhaps looking to be more aggressive inside, so you could see them going, and I think it makes sense to think ahead. Randy Starks isn't going to get younger. You've got him on a relatively good deal for what he brings, and you have two younger players, but I think if you have one of these higher rated players that falls, say, to 50, or even if we love a guy at 19, whether it's Aaron Donald or Rashid Hageman, I don't think you can pass on that kind of talent that they have, or that some people think they have.
Yeah, I would agree. Defensive tackle is really interesting because it's not a major need, like you said, but looking long term, it definitely is a position they could improve on, because it's really just you look at Mitchell, he's basically got a 2-year deal. So, we've got some guys, we have some discrepancies on some of these guys, not huge ones, but it looks like you've got Hageman in the top 10. I have Donald as my top defensive tackle. He's actually a top 6 defensive player for me. I don't know if I'm just falling in love with that quickness off the snap, but if he were 3 inches taller and had a little bit longer reach, I think he'd be the number 1 pick. So if you're sitting at 19, Hageman, I think, can be there. Easily will be there. Donald, I think, might be gone, and Nix will probably be there. If you're going to be taking BPA, who would you? I know you have Hageman top rated, but who would you take for this team at 19 if you're going to go defensive lineman?
I think Hageman has elite qualities that you can't surpass, in my opinion. You don't often see that kind of size and vertical athleticism fail in the NFL. So for me, that's what makes him almost impossible to bust and lose on. Personally, I don't think he passes the Steelers, but you never know. I think Donald, I think lots of people like his hand use. I think he wastes his hands a lot in it. He doesn't use them very strongly, and it's his first step that becomes disruptive. So I think in the run game, you're not going to see him be as effective. Saying that, Hageman isn't as effective in the run game either. He kind of gets up too tall and can get pushed aside, but he has more physical attributes that you can project to being a dominant interior lineman, whether it's Sheldon Richardson or that kind of player. I think he's just a physical freak, and whoever gets him, if you're not getting him in the top 10, he's an absolute steal. I think he's a very rare player that the NFL kind of overlooks at the moment. That those kind of traits they don't really buy into when they should.
Yeah, I agree. I was reading ESPN the magazine yesterday, and they did a statistical study on the combine. And I mean, you see it when Hageman plays. Like when he turns it on, he shows just unreal athleticism. I definitely think he's, in that top 10, top 15 mix, and a lot of that's projection with him. But ESPN the magazine was saying, and I don't remember the author, so I can't quote him, but there were only 11 defensive linemen that tested better in the history of the combine than Hageman when you added it all up, and 8 of them were at least, very good players. Most of them were Pro Bowl, All-Pro level. So you have to look at elite traits. I know we'll talk about that a little bit later, but Hageman I think would be a home run pick. And Donald, some people talk about him being, a maxed out player already. I think you're right. I think that his hand use could improve greatly, and that he's mostly winning just off of that burst. I think once he gets better in that hand use, and if he can improve his awareness against the run game, I think he could be, a very good player. And like I said, maybe I'm just falling in love with that quickness, but for me, that's an elite trait that translates well. So I think we're in agreement.
I still go off what I saw on film. I know a lot of people rose him up after Senior Bowl and the combine, the numbers he put up, but he looked good in the Senior Bowl because he wasn't going up against the premier tackle or guard prospects. So he was going up against the kind of, and he's winning in drills that are made for the interior D-line or D-line prospects to win. A one-on-one with an offensive lineman, the defensive lineman's meant to win that. It's a drill made for him to win. So I think they kind of unbalanced where he's being viewed at. I think he's a good prospect. I think if Geno Atkins never existed, would people even think about him in the first round? And so you can look at, and then I guess we're kind of going back to, not to say he's Aaron Murray quality, but Aaron Murray isn't going to be good because he's short, because Russell Wilson and Drew Brees were short. Donald can be good despite he's short, but because he's short and disruptive doesn't mean he will be good. So that's kind of, there's more question marks, whereas Hageman's size and athleticism, that generally projects to being pretty damn good. So that's kind of where I stand. And then with Dominic Easley, I have him as a top 10 player as well. And I think he probably will drop. It sounds like the Patriots are going to take him at 29 if he's there, or maybe they move down and take him. And I think he would be above, he's above Donald for me anyway, but I think he'd be above most people if he was still healthy. Obviously, he's had 2 ACL surgeries, 1 on either knee, so perhaps it's not a worry because he kept that first step after the first ACL. He said he felt stronger after his first ACL, so whether he's going to come back even stronger again, now his other leg will be stronger. Not sure. His pro day and video didn't look tremendous off the snap, but I guess that's kind of a bit early maybe in the process for him. Obviously, he's going to, now being talked about in the first round, is clearly the draft being set back a while has been great for him, if no one else. So I think he's a really good prospect if he's there at 50. I mean, I would even move up from 50 into the 40s if say New England moved down into the mid 40s and you can take him just above New England. That's who they're targeting for. I think that's a worthwhile trade up to get a top 10 caliber player, and particularly if you're say reaching for a tackle at 19 and you want to kind of make up some of that value, you can take a risk on Easley, a huge upside. Has some risk. I think that's maybe one reason we see them reaching for the tackle they like kind of nullified by taking a high upside player. in this second round.
Yeah, I would love if they could get easily. I have him as my number 9 overall player. Um, I try not to factor in injuries in that stuff because ultimately we can't tell that. I mean, it's just impossible. You could have a perfectly healthy college player come into the NFL and just blow his knee out day one. You can't predict it. I had Tank Carradine last year, who went to the 49ers as a top 8 overall player as well. So you kind of go with that caveat. If they could get a guy like Easley, I think he's phenomenal. You can move him anywhere on that D line, and he's going to produce somewhere. Even if they moved up just a little bit, I think it's going to be really cheap to move up this year because the way everyone wants to move down, and then the bottom half all wants to move up. It seems. I think it's going to be cheap for them to move down if they want to, or move up if they want to go from like 50 to probably even mid 30s. I imagine it'd only take like a 4th round pick. So, and obviously that's all fluid on draft day, but I think that's a guy, if he slips into day 2 somehow, I think they should definitely look into moving up for. Let's go to second round. We've got Timmy Jernigan. When I graded him, I had him really late. I had him as like a 6th rounder. I couldn't find consistency. I couldn't find a good motor or even really a good skill set. He just was kind of outside of his breakout game against Auburn. Half the time he was still washed off the ball just right away. I just didn't think he did a whole lot well. Again, that's a guy that I just kind of felt strongly like that. Like, how did you feel about him though?
Well, the way I look at him is he's in a read and react defensive front, so you have to project somewhat how he projects to the NFL because that's never going to be the kind of schematically how you're going to work in the NFL where the defensive line is attacking, not responding. So you're kind of projecting how he uses his hands, how he finds the ball and elements like that, and then projecting his skill set into an effective player. So I think he has good physical tools. I like his hand use. I think he could potentially 2-gap maybe. I think he could definitely be a 0 shade and be disruptive, and you don't need to worry about taking him off the field at any point. So, and I think you can. I mean, a lot of people say like he doesn't have a high motor, but then I think with defensive linemen, you have to take into account that in college they're going to be playing way more snaps than they ever will in the NFL, and potentially at a higher tempo. So it's hard to kind of make a comparable assessment of a motor at the two. And also you have a lot more time as well to kind of, you don't have to go to school and stuff like that. So potentially he develops that. I can see there's issues. You are projecting kind of how he works in a scheme, how that first step translates, because obviously he's not reacting off the ball, he's reacting to players once they're up and moving. So I think defensive linemen from that scheme are harder to project. But I think he has good tools and good hand use and things that translate well to the NFL. Maybe if we go now and talk about maybe some smaller score, because we don't really know what's going to happen with that 0-1 shade player. So we've got a couple of guys in the late 2nd, early 3rd that kind of fit that mold with Zachary Kerr, Daquan Jones, Justin Ellis, and Corin Reed, a couple names that the Dolphins have been interested in, and they're kind of been hot risers through kind of the end of this process or since the season ended. I think Zachary Kerr is one of my favourite prospects. He was a Georgia player with AJ Francis and then transferred to Delaware when they kind of had all their issues in that program. He's been kind of one of the few players that has come out of that, and he's so disruptive. There's plays where I think it's an option pass of a quarterback. He hits the quarterback and then catches the running back in the backfield, and it's just that kind of athleticism from a guy over 300 pounds is pretty rare, and I think he would be a really interesting kind of midday, maybe if he falls to the 3rd, it's great value and building the strength of the team, making it stronger.
Yeah, I agree. I didn't get a chance to like really grade him, go too in depth, but I really liked what I saw off of him. I also really like Daquan Jones. I think that as a I don't know if you're going to put him obviously inside like that, but he's really more of a one gapper in my opinion. But between Kerr, Jones, Justin Ellis, who was fantastic at the Senior Bowl, and Karan Reed, these are guys that the Dolphins can really take advantage of this draft depth, and especially Kerr. I could see Kerr going mid rounds and just being a steal for whoever grabs him. So, moving forward, this is a team that needs to build that depth. Needs to, they got the defensive line coach that's really done well in his time with the Dolphins. And so you take these players with small risks or small flaws, and you put them in a position to win. And I think you're right on Kerr. I mean, if they could grab Kerr in like third or fourth round, I mean that would be, phenomenal.
Are there any other kind of names you have further down the list that you think have potential to find a roster spot in what's quite a deep group on the roster already?
More than like practice squad, probably not. I'm not really a fan of guys like maybe Calvin Barnett from Oklahoma State. Actually, we've got a high fifth on him. Um, he's kind of a part-time player in college, so you're definitely projecting that as a young player. I don't know if he gets on the field really even his rookie year, but over time, it's a big body. He's got good strength, a little bit of quickness, but it's not really a great value later in this draft. I think like where we picked out guys like Reed and Ellis and Kerr and Jones, I think those guys are going to be the best values. I think the other guys are just developmental guys. I don't know if you're going to get an instant impact out of a guy like Anthony Johnson from LSU, or I like Ego Ferguson, but he's more of a 3-4 kind of guy as like an end. Jay Bromley, I think he was okay. He's kind of like Kevin Barnett in that same mold. So, I mean, day 3, they're going to have opportunities. We've talked about it before, and we'll talk about it here a little bit later. I think they're going to move down and collect picks. So if they want to build that depth, they're going to have the opportunity to in the 4th or 7th round, because these guys, there's a bunch of guys that are in that developmental mode later on.
Well, so now maybe if we move to edge rusher, and then obviously there's been lots of speculation whether they'll move on from Dion Jordan, with Philadelphia offering to trade with him. And obviously, I think this is pretty weak pass rushing draft class when you look at it. So perhaps they've been floating Dion as if they can get tremendous value from him from a pass rushing desperate team. Maybe he's been floated up there, or maybe it's just Chip Kelly trying to get one of his players who he thinks is disgruntled on the cheap. But he obviously not seen him play with immense talent. So with that kind of in mind, I guess we'll look at a couple of the edge rushers and think Jadeveon Clowney might be out of reach. But we look into the other guys we have in the first round. We have Marcus Smith from Louisville and then DeMarcus Lawrence from Boise State. I think they're both two underrated players at the moment who are steadily rising, hearing more and more that Marcus Smith may go in the first, and DeMarcus Lawrence is kind of that borderline first, second. I think they both bring, I mean, they're still not going to be as explosive on the edge or win consistently, but they project better than anyone else, I think, in this class. And I think DeMarcus Lawrence in particular is really interesting. I think Marcus Smith is my favorite player in the class. If you're going to trade Dion Jordan, you have to get that that top 3 offensive tackle and Marcus Smith at some point.
Yeah, I agree. I love Marcus Smith. I don't think he gets nearly enough love for what he does, and you just look at the skill set. That's a skill set that translates. It's been proven like over time. When you look at how he measured, you look at the play style. I think he's an instant impact guy. I think DeMarcus Lawrence is another guy like that. He's more of a 3-4 outside linebacker, in my opinion. You can probably bring him in as a 4-3 end and add some bulk to him. He doesn't blow you away with speed and quickness, but he's definitely fast and quick enough to do the job. Smith more wins with that speed and that first step. I mean, literally Marcus Smith was unguardable at the Senior Bowl. Every single drill that he did, he just destroyed everybody, including guys like Zach Martin. That's the only guy that Zach Martin couldn't block. And same for Morgan Moses. Marcus Smith was clearly the best player there. and it wasn't closed. I would literally, expect to see Marcus Smith taken top 15 and still think that that's a good value pick because I'm not saying he's going to be, DeMarcus Ware or something like that level of player, but I just think he's one of the safest players and that versatility coming off the edge.
And that could
Um,
be a good place for him to go in Cowboy Nation. And
yeah, if they
uh,
can if they can nab him there, that would be an amazing value for them.
I think they're going to be looking at either Marcus Smith or one of the interior defensive tackles, I think, or maybe unless a safety falls. So it's very likely if we see those kind of elite players not reach Dallas, that's where Marcus Smith goes. So maybe if we now move on to Jeremy Okachu, who a lot of people think is better suited as well as free for outside linebacker. But I think we see now so many teams with multiple fronts, it doesn't really matter whether you're standing up on the line or your hand down. Most of the time you're going 90% of the quarterback. So I think if he translates well, maybe he has some of that quickness, a little bit more maybe hand use than Marcus Smith, but not that elite first step bend that I think Marcus Smith could have. He flashes it, but you don't see it constantly from him. And then Aaron Lynch, who's a real interesting player, he looked like he was going to be the Jadeveon Clowney, his first that year in Notre Dame, where he was just absolutely dominant. He transferred to Central Florida. His weight fluctuated, never really looked the same, but get that glimmer of you've seen him do it, so you know he can do it at a young age, and whether that's just people not prepared for him or rising to the occasion or the players around him making him better. But there's something there that if you can re-find it, he could be one of the best players in this class come 10 years down the line.
Yeah, I definitely agree. I want to kind of move down the line here to Coney Ealy, a guy that is kind of polarizing. I don't see it with this guy. I think he's a 4-3 defensive tackle. But I see a lot of hype about him. People compare like what he did at the combine to Clowney, but he doesn't play like that. He's not the same bendy type of athletic player, at least from what I saw. He kind of plays like an outside linebacker, but he's more of a defensive tackle or five tech type of body and play and really where he fits and will win. What do you think about Coney Ealy?
I think he's going to go to a team like Seattle where they have that 4-3 under, so he can play the edge on the first couple of downs and move inside on passing downs, and you have a disruptive player there. He's not going to be hugely disruptive on the edge. Maybe he's kind of like an Oliver Vernon in that kind of sense where you're not getting anything special on the outside, but in sub packages you've got something interesting inside that you've got a nice match up inside on a guard, and when you've got a one-on-one and you've got more edge rushers outside. But yeah, I don't think he's particularly anything extraordinary, and we've got quite a lot of guys around him that are, I guess, quite similar. Like Trent Murphy is almost the opposite. He's kind of guy where he projects better to be someone that you're going to drop more often and perhaps only works in a 3-4 under. You can put his hand down every once in a while, but I don't think he's going to be effective from that kind of area. And maybe if we go to some real small names, Terrence Feedy, and he visited with the Dolphins, and he is insanely good. He played a really small school. I can't even remember the name of it, which is pretty bad. But you can line him up anywhere. He's disruptive. He finds the ball well. He tests off the charts. I think from watching maybe 4 or 5 games, I saw 7 or 8 tipped balls at the line of scrimmage. And obviously you have a lot of screens, so the ball's going sideways, but he gets himself in a position which he can disrupt them, and that's kind of in that game scenario, that's good situational football where you know where the ball's going to be going. And I think he's kind of another, along with Garrett Scott, is another example of proof the Dolphins are using kind of analytical testing scores to find players that fit a model of an NFL player. So this guy tests like an NFL player. He may not have a competition of one, but if we can get him, say, I have him in the low 4th round, because I think you can find that clay. And for me, in the fourth, fifth, sixth round, you're either looking for special team players or freaks that you hope will be a player in 3 years. So I think he could be in that kind of type of player where people are saying to themselves, how the hell did we not draft him?
Yeah, I agree. I think in day three you've got to take you don't need to take maxed out players. So I mean it's kind of surprising to see a guy like Cassius Marsh or Michael Sam or Trevor Riley underneath a guy that you've never heard of from a small school. But ultimately you have to trust in your coaches, especially this coaching staff on the defensive side of the ball. They've proven that they can develop this talent. If you can give a couple of years on a guy like Terrence Feed, absolutely, that needs to be a guy that you're targeting on day three.
Well, I think that's an interesting thing. You talk about players developing, coaches developing players. And I think it's more when it gets into the season, it's having players develop players. And we've seen that with the pass rushers. You had Jason Taylor teach Cameron Wake, and now Cameron Wake's teaching Olivia Vernon and Dion Jordan. And for the most part, coaching is teaching scheme-specific things. They haven't got time to tell someone how to use their hand in a particular move, whereas Cameron Wake's doing it every day. He's perfected that. He's gone through 5-6 years of doing that, and then someone that's been doing it for 10 years telling him how to do it. So you build up that depth of knowledge in that room. And then, so I think that's one area where if you have an area of strength in your team to get young developmental prospects where they have good mentoring from great NFL players, that's how you develop a deep room. And that's why we've seen the Dolphins have poor wide receiver rooms, poor tight end rooms. We've got a great tight ends coach, but we haven't had any good tight ends to teach the tight ends how to play that position. We haven't had a constant wide receiver room where there's players that win a certain aspect of the game and can pass on that knowledge. If you have a constant rotating door of players with different talents or schemes, or even if you look at the offensive line room, you have two players that can fit the scheme, no one that's done it, and of course that's not going to work because you don't have that historical knowledge, muscle memory inbuilt to then be able to pass on that knowledge because you're having your knowledgeable guys learn. So I guess that's kind of like, it makes sense to take the raw players in the position where you're deep because that's how they're going to get better. And maybe if we move now onto off-ball backers, we've kind of separated defensive ends, and so we've put players where we think that they're not really going to be edge rushers, or if they're drafted by the Dolphins, primarily where they'll see snaps is as off-ball backers. And obviously most people think this is going to be a position which the Dolphins will attack with being linked to CJ Mosley and
I think it
busts having not worked, or free agency busts after a year.
Yeah, I think this will be interesting to see how they handle this because I don't think from what I've heard is that they're not overly obsessed with finding another inside linebacker that early, especially like Mosley and Shazier. I know they're interested in both. I think Mosley is going to be the most interesting with his injury history. As far as like a talent grade, I know we both have him, pretty high up, but he also had three major, two dislocations and then a shoulder injury as well that we saw Dion Jordan get stunted by. So it'll be interesting to see. I don't think Mosley falls to 19, but if he does fall to 19, we know it's because of injuries. I'll tell you that much because I know a lot of other teams like him as far as talent, but it's all about the medicals at that point. A guy like Anthony Barr, you could bring in at weak side linebacker and compete with Dion Jordan, and you can put Dion Jordan elsewhere. That would really make that linebacking core a strength of the team if you were able to get a guy like that. But I wouldn't be surprised to see them go Shazier at 19. I think that's a target for them. I think the whole thing with his dad being on the team, I think that's way overblown. I don't think that has anything to do with anything.
I mean, we know that Hickey is a man of God. I don't think he's going to be trusting in the team's chaplain's son to dramatically change his fortunes. So, I think that's somewhat kind of dot to dots to the extreme. And we have Khalil Mack as well as our top off-ball backer, and a lot of people obviously know him as a 3-4 outside linebacker or a defensive end. And I guess we can talk about Anthony Barr as well. Whenever I've kind of mentioned them as targets for the Dolphins, people say we don't need more defensive ends, but they can both play standing up and in space. I think Caleb Mack, you could play at Mike or at strong side linebacker. I think I agree with you, Barr at weak side, and you let him shift through the dirt and chase the backside of plays. And having him on blitz packages is going to would be insane. So, and Mack the same. You can let him blitz, but those players are only blitzing in the past 2 years. I think it's been 300 pass rush attempts from those stand-up linebackers, off-ball backers. So you're not asking them to do that much, but I think they both work well in space, and particularly with Barr, when he's so raw, he doesn't really know what he's doing. Weak side linebacker, you're kind of asking him to do more, but he doesn't need to have a load of pass rush moves. He doesn't need to be setting up tackles for the next move coming down the drive. So that kind of makes he can be more reactive and just uses pure athleticism to win. And I think Barr he was really overrated, and now he's really underrated. And I think kind of from 11 to 20 is kind of his range. 11 being the Titans, where his defensive coordinator is now the linebacker coach, and they're moving to a 3-4, so that kind of makes sense. Maybe if we go, I don't think Carl Van Noy will really be on the team's targets. He's basically Koa-Missy he's basically Koa-Missy now, and so Dolphin fans don't like Koa-Missy, so I don't know why they would like Van Noy. So maybe if we go to kind of like some more, I think the inside class. So maybe we'll finish with like the inside guys, and there's kind of only 2 more players I really think would challenge Ellaby for a start or be able to challenge him to move to weak side linebacker, and that's Carlos Fields and Jordan Zumwalt. There's like Carlos Fields is real small school guy, not much to talk about him, but he has great just technical aspects of the game. He stays straight, like flat to the line of scrimmage, doesn't overcompensate, doesn't sell himself. He basically won't give up. He won't give you up yards. He won't make huge splashy plays, but he's not going to lose you any football games. He'll give you he won't lose you 7 yards on a run, but he won't have tackles broken on him. You won't see running backs fly off around the edge. I think he's a really solid player, and I'm surprised how overlooked he's been with this process being so elongated.
Yeah, I agree. We definitely have to credit Emery Hunt from Football Game Plan for kind of putting him on our roster and on our vision. Fields is really impressive. He did a video on him, kind of highlighting him. But I was kind of skeptical because I was like, okay, this is just like a YouTube highlight package. What's this mean? So I actually got in contact with his coaches, got some tape of Carlos Fields, and honestly, I was blown away. I can't believe that this guy, 1, was at a Division 3 or Division 2 school, and 2, that he wasn't getting any love, like you said. At his pro day, he ran a 4.47, and I think it shows when you watch him. Yes, he's playing, against much inferior talent, and this is a guy that you're going to have to get in and get him caught up to speed and probably teach him a little bit, as far as schemes and concepts. But that's whatever. You're always taking that with smaller school players. I think Fields is probably an early second-round talent, and if we were just going solely off of talent, he'd probably be my number 2 inside linebacker as far as just what he can do on the field. But he's not going to be. He might not be an instant impact player, but it's so hard to tell because, like you said, as far as skill set, he's probably better than LRB. So it's just can he get adjusted that quickly? His vision is fantastic. His patience excellent, but he attacks so well at the line of scrimmage. Really reads blocks and sheds blocks pretty well. It'll be really interesting to see where Fields goes. You listen to everybody, you talk to everybody, that covers the draft, and no one really has this guy on the radar. So if he could go with day 3, that could be like the steal of the draft. Honestly, I would be comfortable taking him round 2 or 3. And I know that might seem crazy, but that's a guy that needs to be on their radar. And then you talked about Jordan Zumwalt. He's a guy that's been getting a little bit more love lately, which is well deserved. Do you think he could really come in and challenge LRB that quickly?
Well, I think he it's more likely going to be probably your weak side linebacker. That's where he projects most. But I mean, he had flashes at the end of the season after he had his moped crash, and he started playing real nasty. And every time he would make a tackle, blood would be pouring out of his head. But he flashes what Kiko Alonso was doing at times at Oregon. I think maybe could be like have a poor man's impact. Now, obviously, Kiko Alonso played inside weak side linebacker in a 3-4, and now moving to weak side linebacker. So maybe that's kind of where he projects more. But I think he's maybe a bit more. He's got a bit more to him, a bit more hard hitting, and he's like an angry downfield player who can easily be a 3-down backer. So I think that's what you're kind of looking for. You don't want a 2-down player that you're going to have to take off the field. Whereas when we're talking about the Mike linebacker, he's got to be a 3-down player. We know that the strong side linebacker is a 40% down player because we have our nickel corner or another safety on the field more than him. So I think he kind of is lost between those two spots. He's not ideal for that weak side linebacker, and he's not ideal for that Mike, but he's the last guy I would be like, okay, well, we've got a competition here at least. And then maybe if we go on to kind of, I don't think we're going to really think about strong side linebackers because they seem to like Komisi, and it's not particularly a great class, but there's some interesting kind of nickel backer type weak side linebackers that you want to keep the offensive linemen off them and just let them run around and cause havoc. And we've got Telvin Smith and Kevin Pierre-Louis both high up, and obviously they both come from prestigious programs. Telvin winning national championship, and Kevin Pierre-Louis was Luke Kuechly's running mate in Boston College for a couple of years. So they both come with that pedigree. I think both of them, lots of people have talked about moving them to be that box safety, but I think because they're slightly undersized, I think you just let them run around and make havoc. When you've got that kind of aggressive defensive front, you want rangy players that are going to clean up things, and that's what they do. They find the ball, they clean it up. Both can move much better in coverage because of that smaller frame. That's one issue with Wheeler. He has that thick top body, which means he can't move quickly. He can't get his hips around. So they don't really have any issue with that. And I think they would be a good addition. Probably you're looking mid-day two, somewhere in the day two for both of those players. Just because they're, when you think about football players, that's what they are. They find the ball, they flash everywhere. I mean, there's going to be probably some Telvin might drop because he wasn't a starter for 4 years. Only last year was a starter, but maybe Florida State's depth kind of mutes that point. We'll see. But I think those are two really exciting players I'd really like to see on the Dolphins next year.
I think they're both kind of victims as well to the traditional mindset of, well, this guy's too small to be a linebacker, so can we move him to strong safety? I mean, no, that's just ridiculous. Like, guys can win wherever. You just have to put them in the position to win. Like you said, you put a guy like Telvin Smith out there, let him chase down the ball. I mean, he's not too much different than Ryan Shazier. He's kind of that same mold as far as size and playmaking ability. We see this a lot at like defensive end and that linebacker and safety, like, oh, he doesn't weigh 245, so we can't do this with him. And it's like that's not the case. Like, you'll see undersized linebackers performing more and more now that the NFL is getting faster. Yes, it's getting bigger, but it's getting faster, and the speed is the biggest aspect. We just saw the Seattle Seahawks win with just unreal amounts of speed on all three levels of their defense. So that needs to be the prototype moving forward, is speed. This Dolphins team doesn't have a lot of speed. So those are two guys I would love to see them target as well.
Well, maybe since we're talking about kind of like physical limitations, we didn't really talk about some of the inside linebackers that don't think would be good fits. And obviously Chris Borland's been kind of touted as a second-round pick, and personally, I don't think if you just watch I think it's a USC game where he just gets destroyed, and I think he has the smallest arm length ever recorded at the combine. So he's going to be off some boards just on his arm length alone. Then he had some shoulder injuries, that he's off at least one board. And I think you can. These are another issue with an inside linebacker. He's going to have offensive linemen on him at times, and with that kind of arm length, you can't do anything. And if you're going to live with a linebacker like that, you need your defensive front to cover up for him, and that's not how that front is built to do that. So I think personally, I wouldn't even have him on the board. But I think maybe where we have him, I think in the high fourth, you're getting some like good leadership depth, special teams player. But I don't think he's going to be a starter at all. And he's kind of similar to what Jelani Jenkins is, who was a fourth-round pick. To me, he's just special teams contributor, coverage linebacker in certain passing situations. He doesn't have the size or athleticism to be a three-down backer. And some players, they just can't be NFL stars, no matter how much you like their game or their instincts. Borland has the best instincts, better than Mosley, and Mosley has really good instincts, football IQ. Borland's is beyond that, and that's how he managed to play so well in college. But I don't think, with his physical limitations, he can translate that well in Miami's scheme anyway.
Right, I agree. I totally agree. I think Borland, I was talking to a couple of scouts at the Senior Bowl, and they were making a bet based off of where they think he'll go. I know a team like Seattle has him in the 4th round, and then a team like the Texans has him in the 7th round. So teams aren't overly high on him. The fact that, there were scouts laughing at the one with the 4th round grade on him because he's small, and like, yes, he was productive, but he wasn't productive like Zach Thomas, like Dolphins fans think. They think, oh, white inside linebacker, oh, he must be Zach Thomas. Like, that's not the case at all with Borland. Most of his tackles come 5 yards down the field. He's not going to be a guy that gets into the backfield and makes impact plays. It's not who he is. He's an instinctive player, but you do have to be somewhat athletic to make it in the NFL. You have to have at least a certain amount of length to break off tackles and breaks or blocks. Excuse me. So ultimately, Borland, I wouldn't draft him. Just period. I don't think I would even draft him because you can find college stud inside linebackers like that and special team contributors in free agency. It's not an overly difficult position to fill, especially for this team. Like you said, we just had Ellerbe and Wheeler put up pretty good tackle numbers. And what did it mean ultimately? It didn't mean anything because they were 5 yards down the field by the time they were even getting first contact on him. That's not the type of guy Miami needs. Miami needs a guy that can make plays at the line of scrimmage or behind the line of scrimmage and be able to cover as well at times. And Borland's just not that guy. It's not, like you said, if you're taking him, you're taking him as a backup. And in this draft, in the 4th round, you need to be drafting more than just a locker room leader and special teams guy. Last year it was okay because last year's draft was awful. I mean, really, you look back at last year's draft, there wasn't much value after a certain point in the first, 2 days. After like that mid-second round, besides like Tyrann Mathieu, you just weren't getting that much value. This year, you're going to be getting a lot of value in that 4th round. You're going to find guys dropping that are normally late second-round picks. So I want to move toward Lamin Barrow, who we got a question on from Twitter. What are your thoughts on him?
He's, again, I don't think he's going to offer you much in passing game or in the running game. He's going to be another special teams contributor. You've got to be, I think, if a player is coming from LSU, there's so many character concerns that come from that school. They don't have elite traits that you see project into the NFL well and consistently. I wouldn't really even contemplate it. I mean, he has, I don't think he's going to be a target at all. I think one guy they have brought in who's interesting, has some big flaws, but has the athleticism and range that's intriguing, is Marquise Flowers from Arizona State. He takes some awful angles, which I think could be maybe part of their defensive scheme, because it seemed to be a consistent or a constant when watching them, particularly if you watch, say, like Marquise Lee play them in 2012, where he ran from, I think he got like 400 yards. but he's a dynamic athlete, and he has a nose for the ball, even if he doesn't know how to get there properly. But he's like an interesting. I think we have him as a low fifth. I think most teams would have him in sixth, seventh range. You're getting some, again, special teams value, but you may have upside of starter if he can learn how to get to the player with the ball. Um, Other than that, I don't think we really have anyone of that much. I mean, it's a pretty bad linebacker group. Maybe Avery Williamson is one guy that's kind of has some intriguing tools as well that you could see working. But other than that, I think it's a bad year to want off-ball backers, particularly in the inside. I don't think you're going to find that much. Maybe another Oregon player, Boseko Lokamu. I don't know how you say his name, but
Lacombo, I think it's like Lacombo.
He's got he's plays fast, finds the ball. He's nowhere near what Jordan or Kiko were, but he's of that kind of style, and we've seen that with Philbin and Coyle in Miami, they've gravitated to those Oregon players when they had Josh Kadu as well. So obviously like the tempo and the speeds that Oregon defense play with as well. Obviously everyone knows the offense for being speed, but the defense as well, and that hybridness that they play where they do those crazy formations where everyone's standing around. What do they call, like tornado Times Square or something like that, where everyone's just standing around, walking around like they don't know where they're going, and then they all just fly out. So I think he is another guy, maybe like Kyrie Fort as well. But there's a couple of names, but I mean, it's whether they fall to you in a range which you see there's value, and the chances of that happening are pretty slim, and teams don't really value interior linebackers that highly anyway. So that's perhaps why Mosley might fall with his injury concerns. I've heard people think he could fall out of the second day, even maybe into the third round with some of his injury, and some people still think he'll be going 14, maybe even 8 to Vikings if they can't find a trade partner. Or maybe now if we move on to your area of expertise, obviously as you cover the secondary for Bleacher Report. So if you want to talk about maybe if we talk about the players that are off the list first, as we have some kind of high-profile players that don't fit the scheme, and then if you say why you think they don't project to Miami and why they would be off the board.
Yeah. So I mean, I put a decent amount of the cornerbacks on here, including like Bradley Roby, Darqueze Dennard. Like Dennard's not on our horizontal board, but even Roby doesn't really fit what Miami wants to do. It's a really deep cornerback draft. That's why at 19, only guy I would really consider taking at 19 is Kyle Fuller. Kyle Fuller is the epitome of what Miami does on defense. Excellent in off-man coverage, able to play zone coverage, especially in like a cover 3 and cover 2, because he's got press upside. He's not much of a press corner right now. He needs a lot of technique work at the line of scrimmage, but athletically, every time I talk about him, it makes me wonder why I don't have him number 1 over Bradley Roby, like in terms of like an overall sense. That's how much I like Fuller. Roby's just a little bit better athlete, but Roby's not the technician that Fuller is. Fuller is a great combination of talent and technique. The only concern with Kyle Fuller is, can he stay healthy? The way he attacks receivers, tight ends, ball carriers, running backs, whatever it may be, he puts his full body into it, and that really leaves him vulnerable to getting injured. So I think that 19, if they're going to go any cornerback in the first round, it needs to be Kyle Fuller. I love Jason Verrett as well, but this team is full of sub 5'10", 5'11" cornerbacks. I don't think Verrett needs to be added to that mix, even though his tape is the best off of 2013. He's feisty. The only real weakness that he has is his size. He's not strong enough to compete with outside receivers. This is a guy that's going to be facing, guys like, AJ Green and those type of players. There's no chance he's able to physically compete one-on-one and jump balls with those guys. But he's a terrific athlete, and that's why you take Jason Verrett as a slot guy, and he's going to be a phenomenal slot guy. He's going to take Alteron Werner as his comparison, and he's a better version of him. So I think he's a first-round value as well. Like I said, though, I don't think Miami needs to take a corner, though.
Yeah, I think at 19 it's a bit maybe too much of a risk with what you kind of have already spent, and then if they do move down and they don't want to take a tackle, then maybe Verrett has some value there. As they've only got 5 or 6, maybe 7 corners if you're counting Wilson as a corner instead of a safety. And then I think if you look at kind of the size of the roster on the cornerback spot, maybe that's something they covet, is that size, get to the ball quickly, break up hip movement, fast reaction, speed, and getting towards the ball. So I think Verrett fits really well. And I guess in Miami, he's not going to be that number 1 corner. You're not going to have him against that number 1 receiver. You either have Grimes or then Jamal Taylor would be the next guy up to take that one. He's got a bit more physicality to him. So I think Miami would be a good spot for him. I think Coyle would love to use that kind of like aggressive style, especially in the run game. He's more physical than Brent Grimes in the run game. So yeah, I think we both have them kind of the same range. And maybe if you want to talk about why Gilbert isn't on your board and Denard aren't on your board before we get down to kind of like some more guys like Phillip Gaines and Aidan Watkins.
You look at Justin Gilbert, and I think the hype kind of got out of control on him. Bleacher Report's Matt Miller kind of touted him as like a top 10 overall prospect, and said some things about how he's overall just this and that and this and that, and Matt's wonderful at what he does, and I'm not taking away from what he said at all. But from what I saw, I didn't see a guy that's going to fit into this system. He's a linear athlete, meaning that yes, he's going to run that 4.37 40, but he's not going to be able to cover underneath routes. He's stiff. He's a big cornerback, but he's not big enough to where he should be that stiff underneath. He has trouble changing directions. So if he's not running a go route, if the person's not running a go route, I mean, I just don't think Gilbert has that much going to him, or comeback route where he's off the ball and attacking down the line, back toward the line of scrimmage where he can intercept the ball. He gives way too much space in zone coverage. He just doesn't understand that concept yet, which is something that's teachable. But for a guy that you're taking at 19, I think that you need to be taking, a guy that really fits your system fairly well, or he needs to be an elite athlete. And I just don't think Gilbert's an elite athlete. I think he's, like you said, I think he's straight line speed's fantastic. Everything else is kind of deceiving. He has pretty good vertical, but it wasn't an elite vertical. It's just, I think, like I said, I think the hype got kind of out of control on him. And then if you look at Michigan State's Darqueze Dennard, that's a pure press cornerback. And the problem with him is that he's got short arms. He's got 30-inch arms. Ideally, out of a press cornerback, you want to have at least 32-inch arms, and you want to be almost 6 foot. Dennard is barely 5'10", so you're looking at an undersized press corner. And his technique is phenomenal. He's, technically he's the best corner I saw in this draft. Everything that he does post snap is just really strong. He's a good press corner. Like I said, he stays on the hip of the receiver well. He stays within a distance to be able to make a play on the ball and get to it at the last second. His hand gestures in coverage are excellent. Like, you'll see plays if you. This week I've got a Darqueze Dennard feature on Bleacher Report coming out. Check it out if you have a chance, because you'll see like GIFs and you'll see illustrations where I showed where there's guys in the end zone, and you'll see a subtle push off that'll push the receiver down to the ground. But it's not going to get called in the NFL because it's so subtle, and he's looking back towards the ball. So technically, he's a very good receiver, or I'm sorry, cornerback. But that only gets you so far in the NFL. Ultimately, he's probably a cover 3 or cover 2 guy if he's going to play zone. But I wouldn't play him much in zone. I think he's just a pure press cornerback. Miami doesn't use that. They didn't use Sean Smith like that. They're not going to use anyone else like that. And I hate to tell people that, but it is what it is. We kind of saw how they want their corners to play. So
I think we talk about like how a player wins, and he wins by making receivers play at his speed because he hasn't got that speed, and the way he'll be utilised in Miami will not allow that to happen. So it we it's fine to say he's a great player. I really like him. I think he's in that mix of being one of the top 5 corners, but he doesn't translate well. And if you look at Gilbert, if you talk about those kind of skill sets, it's not too dissimilar from Nolan Carroll. It's good straight line speed, but his play speed isn't fast. When he's flipping his hips, he doesn't explode out to the ball. It takes him a while. He almost has long speed, so he's good recovery speed, but he doesn't burst out. And I think Gilbert's getting that kind of hype because he makes these athletic plays on the ball, but then he has as many bad plays as he has good. So those are kind of my issues with him anyway, outside of being projected to Miami. But then in Miami, I don't see any different to him being, apart from that he's maybe a slightly better or longer athlete than Nolan Carroll. But Carroll was reportedly meant to be really fast, even though he didn't test that in his pro day. He was, I think, last year when most people were asking who was the fastest player on the team, most said Nolan Carroll over Mike Wallace. So I think that indicates his straight line speed, but you just don't see it when he's playing football. And I have a piece on Findepth at the moment, kind of looking at that hip flexion and explosion and comparing it to Jamar Taylor and Will Davis. And I think it's quite, when you just break down that one kind of component that's very integral to this defense, is you're in off coverage and you're reacting to the player, not to the ball, and you want to explode with them, and you want to be at the receiver when they receive the ball. And it's a difference between getting a first down, or if you get hit in stride and you're 3 steps behind, you're going to catch them 10 yards down the field, no matter, because you're facing athletes at the same kind of caliber. So maybe if we go and talk about Philip Gaines now, who we both have, both rank really highly, and he's a long athlete, but he's more explosive in the hips, and I think he could, if the Dolphins are going to find someone that's kind of bigger and has opportunities to press, whether we saw it slightly in the end zone, but that was kind of about it when you're wanting to kind of disrupt short timing routes. I think he's a really interesting prospect that hasn't got much talk, and he's definitely going to go in the day 2, and whoever gets him is probably the best value if there is a run, which kind of sounds like between maybe 18 to the 30s could be where we see quite a lot of corners going off, maybe if the Jets like Denard. So Philip Gaines, I think, is going to be a really interesting prospect. And then maybe if we go down, I think Shaquille Richardson's a really interesting player who the Dolphins have had in to visit. There's a couple of plays, I think there's an Oregon game where he tips a ball from about a couple of meters outside of the boundary and tips it back into the arms of a linebacker to make the interception. And those kind of like instinctive, natural football plays, they translate really well. We saw it Devin McCourtney against Miami where he tipped it back in. And there's that kind of like special athletic traits. When you see that, it's hard to kind of ignore that talent, especially where he's kind of rated in the 6th, 7th round. We have him in the, I think, the high thirds. I think we're much higher than most people are on kind of those athletic traits and how they translate. And I think maybe Ross Cockrell is a really interesting player, really a leader on the Duke's defense. He played there for 4 years. He was basically the coach of that defense. When you watch Duke games, he was in control of everything. He shut down Mike Evans. He's really smart. Obviously, he's at Duke, so he's smart. And I think he's going to be a really, really interesting player to watch. I think he fits really well what the Dolphins want to do. And he brings kind of some maturity into we've got some kind of like rah-rah guys, and we've got a lot of youngsters there. And maybe he adds some longevity into that room if you get him in the 3rd day.
Yeah, I agree. Cockrell's probably my favorite scheme fit for the Dolphins, along with Gaines, especially on day 2. I mean, Cockrell's going to be a guy that he's going to go unappreciated by a lot of teams because he's that system. And if you're not that system, you probably don't need to bother with him. But you look at what Cockrell did against Mike Evans of Texas A&M. You look what he did against Florida State, against Calvin Benjamin, also Rashad Green. And he's not going to be a guy, I'm not going to say he's going to be Richard Sherman, but he projects, especially in like this type of scheme, he could easily be a high number two cornerback. I think in his zone based scheme or off man based scheme, he kind of brings it all to the table. His biggest weaknesses is probably run support, but you can say that about 95% of cornerbacks in any draft class. That's just if the day you find a good run defending cornerback is going to be the first. That's what a lot of people say, and I mean outside of Jason Verrett, I'd probably agree in this class that all of them pretty much suck at run defense. So it'd be a terrific value because I know we have him valued as a late second. I have not heard any buzz, especially from teams like that. He might be an early day three guy that you take in round four, and you're sitting a year from now saying, okay, well, who were the steals of last year? And you'd say Ross Cockrell. So
Maybe this is a good time to kind of explain how generally the third day works, as whereas it becomes a lot less about kind of these pure elite traits that translate across all boards, and it becomes more what team preferences are, how they project into those specific things. And so I think a lot of players that we maybe have higher than the norm is because they have a particular value for this scheme, whereas they don't have like a Rashid Hageman or he can play anywhere in any scheme, which is very rare, and he can do it, projects to do it at an elite level. Whereas if you don't have those transcendent talents, whether it's vertical athleticism, burst, or even in offensive tackles, if you're talking just like arm length and punch, there's some things that transcend scheme, and there's other things that limit scheme. So I think that's kind of where teams' boards will vary so much once you get into the third day. So you can get these kind of steals when you have such a differential in scheme, particularly as now we're seeing more teams go to press bigger corners. That's going to improve Miami's chance of finding talented players later on that fit.
it's kind of funny too, like when you look at the Dolphins, what they value, especially now on offense, the way they're focusing. I know we already addressed offense, but zone blocking scheme, and then also in their secondary, um, they don't value the money positions as much as other teams would that look at one gap offensive line scheme and cornerbacks that are press cornerbacks that are 6'3" or whatever. The Dolphins don't put priority on that, so I think that's going to help them find value, find starters later. Theoretically, it will. It's now up to the personnel department to kind of put those guys, get those guys, and then the coaches to put them in the right positions. But I love as far as what they've done as far as taking that approach, because when you want to build the team, you want to be able to find. It's all about resource management. So you don't want to be paying, an A-plus player $20 million a year if you can be getting an A-minus player or a B-plus player that fits your system perfectly for half the cost. So you kind of equate that into the draft. Why would you take, I don't know, to find an example, our board's pretty good, but if you look at like, Todd McShay's board, why would you pay Justin Gilbert a first-round pick when you can get a guy like Ross Cockrell in the third or fourth? And it's kind of like that 90% argument that I love. That why would you, if you can get 90% of the player two or three rounds later that fits your scheme better, he might not be the same athlete, but that's a better value, and then that allows you to take a better player in the first round. So I think Ross Cockrell and Shaq Richardson, two guys that we just talked about, I think those are guys that definitely fit that mold.
Are there any other kind of late players that you think are particular scheme fits that are going to be elevated by Miami and steals later on?
Yes, absolutely. There's one that I am driving the ship on. I love this kid, Brandon Dixon. He's from Northwest Missouri State, and like the only thing I could get online was I had to reach out to his coaches. They sent me game tape and they sent me huddle highlights. And watching this guy, he's kind of like a Pierre Desir, a guy that's going to go probably late first, early second from Lindenwood. If you look at him and how he's going to start slow, and as soon as he catches on, I think he's going to be a really good player. I think Dixon is in that same mold. Dixon has everything you want for for a zone-based scheme or an off-man-based scheme. He's 5'11", 199 pounds. He's very good speed. He's like a mid 4.4 speed guy. Um, you can basically put him anywhere as far as what you want to do. His man technique is pretty poor right now, but that's fine for Miami because he's his own specialist. I think if you just you develop him for a year, we're gonna like that's a guy with a really high ceiling. He's got really good ball skills, tracks the ball well, especially when he's facing the line of scrimmage and end zone. Great hips. He explodes in and out of his cuts with receivers. I have a late third, early fourth round grade on him. That's probably a guy that you can get fifth to sixth round. That has higher upside than a lot of the guys in this class for that scheme.
Shall we move on to then safety position? Obviously, they've got Liz Delmas on a 1-year deal, and Jimmy Wilson behind. So we don't really know kind of what they're planning on that position. It's kind of all up in the air. Chris Clemens went for no money to other places, so this is an area in which there's no real stability and there's no kind of inkling of what they want to do scheme-wise, whether Rashad Jones will go back to free safety as he was when he first started playing, or whether they'll mirror like Delmas was doing in the Lions. So we've taken away pure box safeties because there's real no need for that. So you're not going to have just a Calvin Pryor basically. So we're looking at either free safeties or hybrid safeties. Those are kind of the only players they're going to be really looking at. So we've got Jimmy Ward and HaHa Clinton-Dix both kind of up there in the same realm. I think HaHa Clinton-Dix looked much better in 2012 when he was allowed just to freelance a bit more. But this is maybe something that happened with Rashad Jones as well. People say this, it's like, oh, he looked better when he was allowed to freelance. Well, that's because there's someone else cleaning up the dirt behind him. So if you're a talented player, they should be able to work within structure and still be able to make the same plays. So that's a slight concern if you're going to see that drop off, unless you are mirroring and then every once in a while you let the other person freelance. Then that has an interesting dynamic. You have two players that can be playmakers and then also can drop back and cover. You can have one as a single high safety in occasions, but you don't want to live with them there because you'll just get abused. I think Jimmy Ward kind of works in that way. He's maybe not as flashy, not as intelligent, but he's got good range. He can go in the box. I know some people think he's just a free safety. Some people think he's just a strong safety. So that's quite interesting that there's kind of that split opinion, and that kind of works towards if you do think Miami's going to mirror hybrid safety tandem, that kind of projects well. And then the last guy we kind of have high of the two FSU guys is LaMarcus Joyner and Terrence Brooks, and they are kind of, I think, Joyner's interesting. He could play corner. He can play anywhere in the secondary basically. And Brooks, he's going to be more of a free-wheeling safety that you can. He's more. You don't want to have him in man as much, I don't think, as Joyner. Joyner, you can get away with putting him in the slot corner as well, like Jimmy Wilson. But they're both interesting players, and we've always heard about this Florida State being full of talent, and they've kind of gone unheralded for a while now. They've kind of been overlooked. They were so hyped up, and they're two players that kind of have solidified in the second, third rounds, and I think that's really good value for what they bring.
Yeah, I agree. Starting with the top guys, I wouldn't touch HaHa Clinton-Dix if I was the Dolphins. I'm not really a fan of his. I've got him as a high second round pick, and the reason why is you look athletically, he's not really a great athlete. He's always been a highly touted recruit and now a prospect, but ultimately the way he tested as a below average athlete, and I thought it translated to the film. I was really unimpressed. I watched for all these top safeties, especially like the top ones that you see on, through the mid-second, I watched every snap possible. And for Clinton-Dix, Brooks, and Joyner, I watched every snap of 2013. I just didn't see Clinton-Dix being that transcendent safety. And when you talk about being a first-round safety, you need to be an elite talent. You need to be Earl Thomas to be a first-round pick because safety it's a glamour position now, but it's only because Seattle's doing what they're doing. Safety just isn't usually that important of taking a guy like Clinton Dix. It's just you're not going to get the value that you're looking for, I don't think, because he's not a single high safety. He's a cover two safety. In my opinion, you can only give him half of the field and let him, do what he does in that half of the field. I could be completely wrong on that, but I just didn't see the ability to be all over the field making great tackles. And he's a good tackler, but he's just not really a game breaker. Jimmy Ward is kind of a guy that he has no true position, and I think you were right. I think this team's going to be doing mirror safeties, so Ward would bring an interesting dynamic to that. I do think they're all in on Delmas for this year because Wilson can play backup, but if they want to surprise us and take a safety at 19, Jimmy Ward is a guy that would be an interesting player because he's going to get on the field, whether it be a slot cornerback or as a safety. He's got excellent mirror ability, especially for a safety his size, and he's going to have to be able to do that because at 5'11", 193, he's undersized. He has short arms, and for safety, that's not a big deal, and especially at slot corner, it's not a huge deal. So he's one of those guys that you take the complete package, and Miami could definitely put him in a position to succeed because they are not going to ask their guys to do overly too much. So like the measurables for him aren't as concerning because he's able to do so much at either free safety or strong safety. Terrence Brooks is a guy I love for the Dolphins scheme. He would probably be my number one safety on their board. And the beauty of this horizontal draft board that we did together is that we kind of combined what we both think. And so this kind of brings that dynamic of a draft room into play because I'm going to have a guy higher than you will and a guy lower. But I would probably have Brooks tops because idealistically you would have a free high safety, a guy that can cover the entire field, and I think that's Brooks. I think the hype that Clinton Dix gets, I think Brooks is mostly that player. If he had better hands, he would have almost 10 interceptions from last year. He literally dropped 4 or 5 interceptions that just hit him right in the chest, and he just has stone for hands, and it was really crazy. And we asked him about it at the Senior Bowl, and the first thing he said that he needs to improve is his hands. So
and we've seen that with Clemens, obviously, is something that we've dealt with. So perhaps that's something the coaching staff has seen not being improved, and maybe knocks him further. They've lived through that and don't really want to anymore.
Yeah, that's a great point. That's a great point because that's the one way he's definitely similar to Clemens in that regard.
And then if we go on to kind of the guys we have in the mid to late rounds, we kind of have a large drop off between those guys, and then we've got a couple of like hybrid players, Exum, Mark Kissington, Huff, who I really like, and then Brock Vereen, who's really interesting as well, and he's been rising up the Minnesota kid. So maybe if you want to, and then I'm a lot higher on Sean Parker than you are, and got Desmond Southford as well. So there's some interesting players around here that kind of they don't project to be starters maybe day one, or they could challenge being a rotation, nickel packages, and we see lots of the secondary last year was the deepest area of the roster, and it's kind of been stripped back. So we can envision it being built back up in these kind of mid to lower rounds.
Yeah, I agree. I think this is where they would get a depth guy. Exum is a former cornerback. He's huge. I think he projects more as a safety if he's healthy. Brock Vereen has great speed. He'd kind of be that 90%er, if we're talking about that again, of the earlier guys we talked about. He'd probably be like this, I don't know, probably like 80% version of Terrence Brooks. So that might be a good value there in late third. Marquez and Huff's kind of like that 80% of Jimmy Ward. Similar player. You can use him wherever. He didn't look great at corner at the Senior Bowl, but that's not the be-all, end-all. I think if you look at the skills and the traits say he can be an occasional cornerback and can be a player at safety.
Well, he played before at Miami up until his senior year, so he's
right.
Slot corner, he's played boundary, he's basically been everywhere. So he obviously when you maybe have a year's separation and playing higher quality, you're going to have like the rust shaken off you. And I don't know how he was used at the Senior Bowl, what scheme that we see this often in Senior Bowl. They want kind of like corners have been playing press their whole life to going off coverage, and then they don't look like anything, and everyone thinks they look awful. But really, it's you have to look at what they've been asked to do and then what they're being asked to do. And obviously, in a week, it's going to be hard to switch back into a completely new skill set or new, um, uh, like new, um, even just like physical muscle memory of the skills you're reenacting. So
Yeah.
that's understandable.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, it was weird because they had him like lining up against Jordan Matthews in like press coverage, and it's just like, that he's not going to have a chance doing that. I mean, I'm not high on. I agree though. I do like Huff. I do like Huff as like that mid rounder. You take him and you just figure out where to play him, and you play him different positions. He's almost like LaMarcus Joyner in that way too. You don't need to have a full time position for a guy like that. You put him where he wins.
I think we talk a lot about kind of scheme versatility when we talk about offensive linemen, and maybe it's not talked about as much in that kind of secondary area. But you want your depth in secondary to be core special teams players and to be able to play a variety of positions. There's one reason why Jimmy Wilson's been on the roster a long time. One reason why Justin Trustnick, the linebacker's been on. You don't really want him to see the field linebacker, but he brings value. And I think maybe it's like special teams is a key component. It's not just the guy catching the ball and running out. There's 10 guys in front that are doing jobs as well, and you want them to be beyond adequate at that. So they do have value having special core players that then can also, I think, half you're getting depth for free positions and special teams value. So that's why I have him higher than this. Even I have him in the second round because I think he can be a borderline starting safety in a year, and he can play nickel corner, and he's a good athlete. And same with Brock Vereen. I think he's a really good athlete, and he also has that kind of like gene pool that you can project somewhat for. Obviously, there's times when genes don't translate. The NFL seems to like that gene pool, and it could be. I've heard some people think that's why, say, Matthews is one of the higher ranked tackles because of his dad and cousins. But sometimes there's people are looking for easy answers to complex questions. Maybe if we know you like Desmond Southward a lot, so maybe if you want to talk about him, then there's a couple of smaller guys like Jonathan Dowling and Vinny Sunseri, or Sunseri, even though he's an Alabama kid, he's kind of under-tapped. Maybe if you want to talk about them and any other players that we have low on our board that you could see contributing in some way, if not as impact players.
Yeah, so Desmond Southward is mostly an athlete at this point. He doesn't have a lot of spatial awareness, and he doesn't really bring a whole lot of versatility to the safeties position. Like if you're going to be interchanging safeties, I mean, he just kind of is what he is. He's a good athlete that you just need to refine over time. He's big. He's 6 foot, 211 pounds, very fast. Doesn't develop him over time, but you look for athletes first. I think you look for athletes first, especially in that day 3 area. And that's the guy that they could potentially use well with this scheme, because if you give him a year, kind of help him understand where he needs to be at, and just more of like that discipline. I think it comes down to discipline more than anything with him. I think he could be an effective role player, or a guy that could replace Delmas if Delmas is a flop in a year. Trey Boston is a guy I was a lot higher than you on. I have a late second round pick value on Trey Boston purely because he's an excellent athlete. He has no idea what's going on behind him, but if you can keep the plays in front of him, he sees the field fairly well, able to play man coverage. Ball skills are pretty good, and he's a good tackler. So he's another guy that you bring in and you try to develop those instincts and that awareness. There's no real precedent for that being developed. Ultimately, you usually like to see higher instincts than athleticism and safety, but again, we're talking day 3, so you're wanting to get a guy with that high potential. Oklahoma State that no one talks about at all. I compare him directly to Chris Clemens in the fact that you're not going to really notice him because he's just doing his job. He's not going to be flashy. He's not going to force a ton of turnovers, but he is, in the truest sense, a safety. He's not going to give up huge plays. He's going to be in position most of the time. Um, he's kind of a safe pick. He's kind of the opposite of Boston and Southward. Not a phenomenal athlete. I don't even think he was brought to the combine, or he didn't go to any college all-star bowls. But when watching Justin Gilbert, he was a guy that kind of stood out to me as you can bring him in probably as a priority free agent. Again, I have him as a low fourth round value, and he can make the roster. Um, Maurice Alexander is a guy out of Utah State. I like a lot. High potential player, low floor. Had a little bit of off the field trouble in 2012. Probably enough that where he might not even be on the Dolphins board. But you look at athletically what he brings to the table, his playing style. He reminds me of Rashad Jones quite a bit actually, except for he's bigger and probably has a little bit more of that nastiness to his game. He is a very physical player. So he's a guy that will fall, I'm sure, because of that 2012 incident. He was suspended for 2012. So if that can be cleared up, though, I think that's a guy that's a big sleeper. And then Vinny Sunseri is a guy I'm not really a fan of his. You can move him around a little bit, has a little bit of versatility. He can play cornerback, but you look at the physical traits. I'm not a huge fan of what he brings to the table. Ultimately, I think you're getting a maxed out player. He's 5'11", 210, so he's got decent size, but he just doesn't really do much extremely well. He doesn't really have the ball skills to make a difference in that regard, and his technique and his run support is pretty decent. So you're kind of taking him as he's not quite an in the box safety. That's not where he has to stick because you can move him to corner, but he's more of that mold of, here's your role, this is what you have to fill, and if you get him outside of that comfort zone, I'm not sure if he's going to add too much. And then Jonathan Dowling,
Be very
he's a guy.
hard on Seri. Maybe it's just the Saban defensive back link that kind of pushes them up, but I've heard a lot of people say he's going to go a lot higher than people think or project him to. I know a lot of people have him as almost a drafted free agent, so it'll be interesting to see where he goes. I think he has some. I think he can, into certain defenses, maybe even like a Rex Ryan defense, he could play straight away. And you could use him in packages in Miami. But so kind of when we're talking about players in the fifth round or lower, we're not really even contemplating them being starting impact players, but they have a specific role, whether it's pass down specialist, special teams, kick returner, something like that. Or like depth that you're projecting to be a starter in 3-4 years. So this is how kind of teams envision them. You're not looking at, oh, this player's talent is this far down. It's more, this is what value, what we're gaining from this player. So I think there's some value to having a player like him, more value to certain teams, but I think his knowledge of the game, I think defensive backs, there's some awful ones like Dion Blue and stuff like that didn't even play football, but they still probably get drafted because of that pedigree.
Yeah, definitely. I definitely agree. I agree that Sunseri has a role in the league. I thought that the low fourth range, I think that's a good compromise where we were at, where you were at, Adam, and where I was. Last guy I want to touch on is Jonathan Dowling. This is a guy that played through 2013 with a torn ACL. He knew he had a torn ACL, and he's just probably the toughest son of a bitch I think I've ever seen. Played pretty well, considering. I mean, obviously, when you're playing with a torn ACL, you're not going to have that lateral agility that you want to see. The top end speed wasn't really there, but he has it normally. So I went back to 2012, and the guy has it. He's got the physical tools. Now you just kind of have to refine those physical tools, and you have to get him healthy, and you have to hope that he comes back, ready to go. I think he's a guy, day 3 could be a steal, an absolute steal, just because of, you look at the toughness, obviously the leadership skills are there. you just have to hope that that your medical staff sees what he can do, um, and let you know beforehand. And he could be a guy, like I said, he could go, undrafted because of the injuries, but he's got huge size, 6'3", 190 pounds, good speed. All of the other traits that you want to see are there. He's got clean hip flexion. If you want to even put him at corner, I wouldn't be surprised if someone puts him at corner when he's healthy. So Dowling's probably the last notable guy on this board. Everyone else is definitely a guy with major flaws, or has quite a ways to go to even contributing.
Yeah, I think also that wraps up our big board. Is there any kind of? I think we've kind of glossed over the kind of tail end a bit of this sixth, seventh, like undrafted free agent guys. So across the board, are there any kind of like names that you think will be particular targets or names to watch, kind of even when the UDFA tracker is coming through?
Um, it's kind of hard to tell. The Dolphins have a lot of roster spots to fill out. Um, I'm pretty sure they're one of the least manned teams in the NFL right now. So I think we're going to see them quite active in the undrafted free agent period. The guys we have listed, guy like Corey Miller or Shamil Gary out of Oklahoma State. Like, I mean, I wouldn't be surprised at all to see guys like that. I think we're going to see them go very heavy on analytics, like we talked about earlier. I think that's going to be the way that they spend those signings, or maybe even those late picks. It's kind of hard to predict because I mean a lot of those guys are guys that we've never really even heard of before, or small school guys. But do you have any that you think they'll go after specifically?
Well, I think we've kind of got a couple of guys that I think most teams may not have even heard of, whether it's Terrence Feedy or Garrett Scott, or so there's a couple of players like that where I think they've honed in on them, and there's only been 3 or 4 other teams that I've seen kind of show interest. So whether they prioritize them by spending a draft pick or get on the phone to them early as a priority free agent, and I think perhaps Miami has kind of an advantage of location-wise and tax-wise, bringing in free agents, and this is going to be a really deep class, particularly in wide receiver. I think we've got a lot of interior O-line on our list, but that's just because I've watched a ton of them, and there's not that many really good ones, and there's lots kind of ones that have particular attributes that translate and others that don't. So I think there's one. I think Lonnie Banatel, maybe Ballantine, I think is his name. He's interesting. Walt Aikens is a really interesting player. I think he could be on their board at some point. But I mean, is when you're looking at kind of like what they're going to do in the UDFAs, I think they're going to take probably a player from each position, and probably the one where they have a really high metric standpoint on. It seems to be the trend of the visits they've had as players that have tested in the top 25 kind of area metrically of that position. So that's like their Canadian offensive lineman, Laurent Dorovedane Tardif. He's like in the top 25 tested physically in that position, like percentile. Garrett Scott's much higher than that. I think he's in the top 10% percentile testing. So I think these are something that we're going to see. We'll get a better kind of idea of after the draft, kind of how they use analytics to decipher talent. Perhaps they use it in a way to locate smaller school talent to watch, or do they use it as, oh, this player we have similar grades from tape on these 2 players, but this player's tested better, so we take them. So it'll be interesting, perhaps in the higher rounds, what they preference, if it's still those physical attributes, or if they preference tape over physical attributes in the top, and then lower they go take the risks. So I think we'll learn a lot after this process. We're kind of shooting a lot in the dark. We have, of course, the whole offensive side of the ball, other than the O-line, is basically a shot in the dark. We kind of seen what Laser's done in Virginia. Then obviously he's gone to a very different tempoed offense and similar traits in the line play and general athleticism and moving components inside. And then on defense, it's pretty much going to be the same, a new linebacker coach, but nothing else has really changed. So I think we've kind of, that's why we kind of have a more kind of shortened, compact group of players and some of the bigger names off the defensive board because we're more certain of that direction as long as Hickey is coherent with that. Because obviously when Hickey was in Tampa, they had Talib come in and players like that that are the complete opposite of what is currently on the Dolphins roster. So there could be variables if Hickey is controlling the ropes. We'll see that kind of working dynamic, who has the power over what traits they preference more, as we kind of talked before. Everyone preferences individual things or look at or have higher regard for different attributes in other people, and that's just a natural thing you're going to see. So some people are going to prefer players that are consistent on tape, some are going to see the raw athletic ability and project that into what they think they can mold it into. And so it'll be interesting to see kind of what we may even see how long they believe they have with the Dolphins by how the players they take. Obviously, Jeff Ireland must have had some kind of inkling that they had a long time with Dion Jordan, as he was a phenomenal athlete, but he projected, particularly into the position they drafted him for. They did take Dion Jordan from tight end when Chip Kelly was in Oregon. They took him from tight end to play defensive end. They were in a 4-3 at the time. They did move Dion Jordan, which I think lots of people forget. He was moved to be a defensive end, not to be an outside linebacker, and they moved to an outside linebacker. I think a lot of people get kind of stuck up on what did the play, and I've seen this with Jadeveon Clowney as well. He played in a 4-man front. He has to be a 4-3 defensive end. Well, if you're talking about a transcendent talent, a top player in the class, that athleticism is beyond scheme, and it should work anywhere. And that's kind of, I think, what you see in that kind of top echelon of players. There's certain players, particularly nose tackles, that are very scheme dependent. 5-tech defensive tackles are very scheme dependent. But other than that, and offensive linemen, you're going to have some variance in scheme, but generally higher offensive linemen are going to have good athleticism, lateral athleticism that projects to both schemes. So I think scheme becomes more important later, so that will be interesting as well. We maybe see more what the scheme is going to project as. And then maybe I think now you want to talk about elite traits when we wrap up and kind of finish this series talking about our horizontal board. So maybe if you want to like start off and how you evaluate and what you put precedence into in particular.
Yeah, I just kind of wanted to touch on this because people have kind of asked, like, well, why do you have player X over player Z? And it just, for me, it comes down to elite traits. I think every position has a set of elite traits that if a player has, generally we see those traits lead to a sustained career, or takes a player and kind of brings them from an average player to an above average player, or even better than that. And I just kind of wanted to touch on that to kind of give our take on those just certain positions. Doesn't have to be every position, but if you look at quarterback, I put a precedent on accuracy, anticipation, and vision. Yeah, I think that arm strength is nice, but, and I'm not saying they have to have, they can have a noodle arm like Chad Pennington and be fantastic, because I think Pennington was more of an exception. But you look at like Peyton Manning, he wins the game with his head. He doesn't win the game with a strong arm. And I think when we're talking the top quarterbacks in this draft, we've gotten a lot of questions about the Manziel thing, how we have Manziel so low. And just part of that is just because you look at his decision making and his anticipation in seeing routes come open, like it doesn't translate for him because he didn't do it. He didn't have those decisions, and he didn't have, the anticipation factor. Another position that I like to look at, I'll leave offensive line to you since since you're the guy there, is off of defensive line and pass rusher. What kind of jump do they get off at the line of scrimmage? Are they able to shed blocks with strong hands? Do they have good hand use? Um, do they have good awareness in space? Can they find the ball carrier? Something like hands is more of like a technique thing, but if they don't have heavy hands and just an understanding of their own ability and understanding where they win, I think that's an important factor. And then just looking at defensive backs, I think elite traits for defensive backs, there's a strong correlation between their three-cone agility and success in the NFL, and also strength as well. Um, so I mean, if you're not laterally explosive as a cornerback, you're probably not going to be good unless if you're in a very specific scheme and you've got other great traits like you know fantastic ball skills. That's why a guy like Asante Samuel has had a career so long is because he has fantastic ball skills despite having horrible discipline and many other issues throughout his career. But when you've got that elite trait, especially when it's mental or it's an elite physical trait such as like quickness or speed or agility that can compensate for any other mistakes that you can make. Those are the type of players that NFL teams are looking for, and I think that people just need to remember Thursday night that these teams are looking for great athletes that they can mold. So if they're going to go higher than you think, like Hageman, like we both really like him, he's going to go higher than what people think because he's got elite traits physically, and now it's up to himself, the position coaches, and the players around him to help get him to the highest level possible.
Yeah, and I think this is something that kind of we talk about tape, but tape doesn't necessarily mean production. It's isolating what works and what doesn't work. And that attributes may work in college football that do not translate. So an elite trait, for me, what I'm looking for, even if it's a flash of, say, that first step, that bend around the edge, they may not do it consistently, but if you see them do it once, you know they can physically do that. Once someone can physically do that, you can progress that to where they can do it consistently and effectively and dominate doing that. And I think with the Dolphins in particular, we've got examples of players that took a while to develop, but they had physical attributes. You look at our best players like Cameron Wake and Brent Grimes, both undrafted. Cameron Wake had to go to the CFL and be an accountant for a while before he became one of maybe possibly the best 4-3 defensive ends in the league at the moment. So I think this is also another thing to bear in mind with Dion Jordan is if Cameron Wake took 4 years or 5 years to progress into this player, Dion Jordan may take 2-3 years in a more highly paid and organized, better coached system than a CFL team, but he has the physical traits that are very rare to find, and that's what you pay a premium for, and that's what it's hard to find. This is one of the best draft classes that I can ever remember, but I'm pretty young. But there's not any pass rushers. There's two, maybe. And Mack is maybe a pass rusher. Barr is rawer than Dion Jordan. He's going to take a couple of years till he's a dominant pass rusher. So you're kind of looking for, if a player's taken high, it doesn't mean they have to be an impact player, but day one, but you're projecting them 2-3 years down the line that those physical attributes, those mental attributes that you're projecting will win in the NFL at some point, and they're worth that investment because you can't find the players that go in the first round on physical talent. You don't find them in free agency. You don't find them on the street. And that's what you look for. You look in the draft, the players you want to take high are players you can't find on the street. And that's kind of how you separate them. So when we have, say, Taylor Lewan Lowe, yes, he runs fast, but laterally he can't move very well. You can find players on the street like him. They're called bad tight ends. And so there are comparables to that. You can find big guys that run fast in a straight line. But in certain positions, you need to have other. So for me, a tight end running fast in a straight line isn't a projection to success. It's that hip flexibility, moving laterally, and how they use their hands. And so these are like different things. Maybe we'll be doing some draft coverage after the first day. So maybe there'll be a pick, maybe there won't be for Miami. Maybe we'll have a couple of more picks in the second day, but we'll have a show after the Seattle Seahawks are on the clock, and we'll be talking about the first round pick and then going forward what may happen in the second day, and we'll do the same on the Friday night after the last pick of that. So we'll be into the hundreds then. We'll have at least 3 Dolphins, we assume, new to the roster. And then on the Saturday, we'll be doing a hangout show with a couple more guests we'll have come on, and we'll go from around maybe middle or end of the 6th round when kind of the TV broadcasts kind of peter out and just talk about whichever player is fashionable, so probably Michael Sam for a couple of hours. So you can come and watch us talk about UDFAs and free agent signings, and we'll have a longer show with some guests on. And unless you want to add anything more in?
We got 2 questions on Twitter we can get to real quick. From David Bolin, DBolin98, our buddy. What sort of trade would it take to move out of the first round to gain more picks, considering the depth of the draft? So he's asking, what would it take to get out of the first round, and what would we get in return? I think if we're looking to get out of the first round, it's going to be a considerable haul because I'm expecting quarterbacks to be there at 19, especially I think Bortles is going to fall. So that would be a pretty big fall out of the first round. I don't think Miami's looking to drop that far back, but if they're going to be moving from 19 to, let's say 33 or whatever, I would expect to see probably a future pick in there. I don't know if we're going to see, if you're taking 33, maybe you're giving up a third round. They're giving up a third round pick to move up to 19. I don't know if that's the return we would need. I think I'd rather have a 2015 second round pick.
Or maybe a team like Seattle that have multiple picks in the second and third, and they give up. Perhaps they want to target 2 players in the first, so they want to keep their first round pick, but they're happy to give up their 2 in the second and a third and a fourth, and they're not going to be looking to kind of build depth into their roster, but maybe they want 2 premier players. Maybe they have 30 players they really like, and they want to isolate those 2 and know they can get them. So perhaps that's another deal if they don't really like a tackle anywhere until the middle rounds and they're willing to punt that and just build depth. So that could be one kind of position where you're getting the quantity of picks makes up for the quality of picks. Personally, I would rather kind of stay in that top 30, and you want to, if you're going to drop down to get, say, the right tackle you want, you either have to drop in front of Carolina and take Morgan Moses, or you have to drop somewhere in front of Washington to take maybe a Jawan James or Cameron Fleming, whichever tackle you're isolating, or Mewhort, whoever you want. And this is kind of when it becomes different from, you may have players ranked in that kind of same realm, but if you have one particular player you want and you want to get them, we kind of saw that with the Bills last year and EJ Manuel. He may have not been in that realm, and there was a few quarterbacks kind of ranked similar to them, but the Bills wanted him. They trade back, acquired a picked the player they knew they wanted and knew would be there. So I think if Miami wants to do that, they have to go to 27, or they have to go to 33, 32, 31, 29, something like that to get one of those right tackles if that's what they're moving down for.
Yeah, and I think maybe the most likely deal, and if they can get a second round pick, another one, like 2 second round picks in return, that would be phenomenal.
And that could be a deal from San Francisco, quite realistic.
Right. Yeah, exactly. So, I mean, I know they're trying to get way high up. They're probably, I would be shocked if they're not like a top 12 pick after their trade. It just seems like they're poised to make a huge move. I think Miami's most likely move is probably moving down to 26 with the Browns. That way the Browns can jump the Cardinals, get a quarterback if they don't take one at 4, which I don't think they're going to take one at 4. And they can probably get Derek Carr there, or, Blake Bortles, whoever they want, maybe even Teddy Bridgewater at 19. Because they've got to jump the Cardinals, and then that way the Dolphins in return would get 26 and probably a third-round pick. And then that third-round pick allows you to take an extra guard or an extra tackle or whatever it may be. It just helps build that extra depth.
Well, kind of
And then
like be interested in kind of that slot receiver or kind of like offensive weapon, movable chess piece, and that's kind of the value where you're going to be able to jump teams that want them is in the third round, where you can have your pick of choice of whether it's Robert Heron or Dry Archer, that kind of player. I think
yeah,
in the mid third round, that's where you're going to be able to get your preference. So I think there's
exactly.
certain positions where they're niche players, or they're going to be a core of your team, and you want your guy, you're going to have to pay slightly above the price. Whereas if you're comfortable with the depth of a position, you can let it fall to you. So it just depends on how comfortable they are with the class in that particular core, whether they're happy to let the board fall to them, or if they feel they need to reach slightly for someone that they're comfortable with.
Definitely. And our other question comes from James at draft_precursor. Dolphins are on the clock, and Mosley, Zach Martin, Calvin Pryor, and Taylor Lewan are gone. What do we do?
Well, we're probably celebrating that Pryor and Luana are gone, and we've got some
Yes.
talent that's fallen. Uh, well, now I guess we've got to think about whether we're going to go for best player available or if we're going to go for needs kind of player. So maybe if you say where you would go. I mean, he hasn't said. I'm probably going to go Rashad Hageman just because he hasn't taken him off the list, and that's going to be most likely my top-rated player. Either if not him, then an Odell Beckham or a Marquise Lee, I think, are the kind of players, or Kyle Fuller, so in that kind of range where they're players I have rated higher than most of the class and in a position of somewhat need, or that they're adding a quality to a position.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, it's so hard to do that because ultimately, two of these guys I don't want anyways. Pryor to me is not a good fit at all for this roster. Um, Mosley and Martin, I don't think either would be there, especially Martin. Martin, I'd be absolutely shocked if he was there. Mosley, and again, Mosley mostly comes down to the medicals, whether he'll be there or not. So, in considering if they're all not there, you just kind of have to look and see who else is there. I mean, if Odell Beckham's there, I have Odell Beckham as a top 10 overall player. I would take him in a heartbeat.
I
As you
really
said,
getting past the Jets though, unless Ebron falls.
yeah,
I think if
exactly.
Ebron, Beckham, and that's if they even get to the Jets, you could see Beckham easily going to the Steelers, Ebron to the Bills. I mean to the Ebron to the Bills. So I think skill position. Even though it's deep, it's going to be interesting how kind of teams approach the depth of this class. Even though
Hmm.
skill positions are deep, whether they want to take their guy, their person they've rated. I think there's some team that have, or a couple of teams that have Odell Beckham top of their board as we do. So um, I don't think that would be a surprise if even Odell Beckham's the first wide receiver taken.
Yeah, and to answer the question, I would probably say, what do I project? Excuse me, what do I project the Dolphins doing? I think they trade down, or they just take Juwan James at 19. I'd be pretty surprised if I have this feeling that they're going to force that right tackle pick in the first round, and then that'll allow them to take everyone else after that pick. So what I would do is different than what the Dolphins would do. So I know, I sometimes I might come off saying that I would take the tackle in the first round. I probably wouldn't, unless if Moses was there. I'd take Moses or Martin at 19. But if those guys aren't there, I'd trade down and pick someone else, or stay there and take like Devontae Adams or someone. But so yeah, I mean, it's a little bit different question for what you and I would do, Oscar, because I know we both like the BPA method more than the O line method, but I think they're going to go biggest need.
I
Then our
think
last question.
if you're trading down, then I can understand that if you're targeted the player you want, but you don't like him at value, and you don't think he'll make 50, it makes or a range in which he's going, then this is the issue with BPA. We can say what our best positional value is, or what our highest grade is, but that's not always going to translate to what the team has. So we're kind of projecting through our own tape evaluation and looking at what the Dolphins do, how we project what their board would look like. But I mean, we could be way off. They could have Mark Whittington Hunt first overall for all we know, and it's just, as we say, people preference other attributes or look for different things than we may do, and they also have a far greater access to medical information and police reports and college information from coaches, weight room staff. So we kind of can only evaluate players from what we see with our eyes, and we try to ignore kind of media speculation on prospects because we don't have an even plethora of information on everyone. For all we know, everyone we have as a fifth rounder could have injury worries, but because they're not high profile, they don't get brought to the surface as much. Or they could all have misdemeanors like a Mettenberger or Caldera, who we have taken off the board just because we know that, say, for a Mettenberger, you're not going to want someone that has sexual offences as a backup quarterback and who has quit. So you can project that it's very unlikely a player that you're not projecting to start or ever start, you're going to take that kind of red flag risk on. So we're quite comfortable saying he's going to be off the board. So I think that's kind of where we've had when it's quite a clear and red flag and especially with the Dolphins and the kind of instability they've had of late and the very young locker room. Of course, a lot of talk last year was about how it had a college atmosphere. So having players that weren't particularly mature in college maybe don't translate well to a college atmosphere. So that could be another reason why a Taylor Lewan could drop. I know a lot of people have said he could go in the top 8, and I've heard a lot of people say as well that he could fall as low as the second round, where we have him. So there's a lot of interesting storylines kind of where players will go, and maybe once we get to the 18th pick, we'll have a better knowledge of what might happen. Because I think this is one draft where no one knows what's going to happen from the first to even the second pick. So it's going to be all dominoes from there. And the Dolphins are in a position where they do have picks they can move up. They're in a position where they don't have a desperate need, where they in a kind of a prestige position that you have to move up for. Right tackle isn't necessarily a prestige position. So I think it's going to be an interesting draft and one that have zero clue of what will happen.
I agree. And like you said, next week after the draft, we'll be doing another chat, so that'll be our next episode. Just want to thank everyone for watching, participating, sending us questions. Always feel free to reach out to us and check out Findepth every day. We've always got new stuff posting. So is there anything else more that you want to add, or I think we covered mostly everything?
No, I think just watch Garrett Scott. He'll probably be in Aqua soon. That's it.
Yes, please make that happen. Hickey, if you do anything this weekend, please add Garrett Scott to our roster.
Well, the only fan base that wants him, so or probably knows his name. So I think that's got to be a selling point.
Hopefully so.
He'll have the highest 7th round jersey sales.
Future God.
All right. Well, have a good day, and I don't know if you have a bank holiday, but we do. So.
It's Sunday here, so we're off always on Sundays. Our banks are always closed on Sundays. So.
We've got Monday off as well. So
ooh.
We're living a dream. May Day.
All right. Thanks for joining, everyone.
All right. Take care.